Let's talk about how pop culture or social media may influence like this whole field of mental health. So, definitely Facebook, Instagram, pretty much all the big tech companies are constantly fighting for our attention, showing things that either excites us or makes us angry, or maybe the illusion that things are perfect. Yeah. What are your thoughts on this?
That's a whole nother episode, and I have so many thoughts that they're all jumbled together. Oh gosh. I was talking to a friend of mine recently, and I think she watched a whole documentary on influencers, and how there's actually like at kind of like a higher rate of suicide amongst people who choose that profession. I think part of it has to do with kind of constantly having to portray a certain image of yourself, right? And it's like when you're constantly in a state of trying to portray, or an image of yourself, or doing like impression management all the time, like I wonder how that impacts our ability to authentically understand who we are, right? Because if our personality is being shaped by likes and by what people want to see, right? Like we may push other parts of ourselves away, right? Or not really tune into ourselves because we're like hyper focused on how other people are perceiving us.
Welcome to episode 5 of the Enculturation Podcast, where we aim to make learning about the world fun, engaging, and accessible, helping you stay tuned, stay curious. So today I have the wonderful pleasure, honor, privilege of welcoming my good friend, Aaron Mason. Aaron Mason is a licensed psychotherapist and movement artist based in Los Angeles area. His study of dance has included techniques of hip hop, house, jazz, ballet, modern, and most recently, West African dance. His dance journey has also afforded him the opportunity to dance with Culture Shock San Diego, Unity Dance Ensemble, Rhapsody in Taps, the Brembra West African Dance Troupe, Soleil Dance Arts, and choreographer Victoria Marks of UCLA. In 2018, Aaron also received a grant from the Alliance for California Traditional Arts to deepen his study of West African dance with dance and drum master Wilfred Soley. Aaron has received his bachelor's in psychology from the University of San Diego in 2006 and his master's in counseling psychology from California State University, Long Beach, with an emphasis on marriage and family therapy in 2014. Aaron is currently the clinical director of Reach LA, a non-profit organization serving the LGBTQ BIPOC in the Los Angeles area, and also maintains a small private practice. Aaron is currently continuing his education through the study of dance movement therapy in hopes of blending his passions for dance and the healing arts. Welcome to the show.
Hello,
Aaron.
Thank you. That was a mouthful.
Well, it was with pleasure.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I thought I was writing this like, this is too much information, but whatever.
So welcome to the show. I'm excited to have you here. It's been a full circle from knowing you to get to part where we are. I'm so happy that you agreed to come on the show. And, I generally believe in what you're doing, and hopefully we can disseminate some of the information and make it accessible, right?
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure. We go so far back. So like seeing you evolve into this is really a gift. So thank you.
Yeah. So with that said, let's get right into it. Right. Mm-hmm. My first question, I think, is going to set the foundation for the rest of the conversation. So, just what exactly is mental health? And the reason why I ask that is, I think there's misconceptions or misunderstandings about what mental health is, and maybe some like stigmas around it. Whether it's like mental health is, you gotta take a bunch of pills, or if you seek mental health, then you're a crazy person, So let's unpack all that. So let's start from the top. What is mental health?
Yeah, so I can speak to what I think about when I think of mental health. And, this is just kind of my own personal lens on it. So if you ask different people, they might say different things. But what I can share is that oftentimes when I think about mental health, I think about our relationship to our nervous system. And I think about what happens like when we're in a nice kind of regulated state, like we're in that nice, calm social engagement network. So like I'm talking to you, and if I feel relaxed, like the conversation just flows, there's a sense of safety. And then I think about, what happens when we don't have that kind of sense of regulation or that sense of safety. And so if you've heard of like the fight or flight mechanism in our body, which, is very helpful evolutionarily, lets us know when there's danger present, and really helps us protect ourselves. But sometimes that can be kind of keyed up, especially if we've had traumatic situations in our lives, or even just like from toxic stress, right? So there's something called a window of tolerance, right? And when we're inside of that window of tolerance, we're usually pretty regulated. We're in that social engagement network. And then when we become triggered, whether we go above that window of tolerance into like hyper arousal, so like I'm anxious, like before we started this podcast, right? Or my body kind of shuts down. My nervous system kind of shuts down. I go below that window of tolerance into more of a dissociative kind of cutoff space. So what we're trying to do a lot, I think, within mental health is really help people find flexibility in their nervous system so they can find their way back inside that window and maybe even expand that window, so that, if they are triggered, they can more easily come back to a place where they feel regulated again. So really that's just one lens on it, but that's one of the things that I think about. Yeah.
Great. Before we continue, I just want to put a disclaimer for our listeners out there. If you know you yourself or somebody who needs mental health, right away contact the right organizations nearby you. So don't let this video be the only stop for this, right?
I really appreciate that. Yes. If you need help, there are so many services out there, and we'll talk about that more later. But yeah, definitely seek professional help. So
yeah. So what about like mental health as far as its history? Like how did it come about? Is it like a relatively recent practice as compared to as physical health, for example,
Yeah, I think the recognition of it is definitely more recent than the medical field, which is why I think it's still coming into a place where we're really understanding the impact of our mental health on our physical health, right? Like those things, I don't think you can separate those things. But I think historically we've placed more of a priority on the physical body, right? Not recognizing the ways in which, we hold stress or, our relationship to our nervous system really affects our relationship to the world, I think. And so I'm not like a 100%, a historian, but I can say that my education, began around like psychoanalysis and Sigmund Freud, who everybody probably hears about a lot when I think of psychology. You sit on the couch and you're just free associating and you're telling somebody everything that comes out of your mind and they're analyzing you, which is, not so much how it is now. I think we've learned kind of a lot of Freud's approaches were not necessarily the only way to approach, and not everything was actually helpful about the way that he approached working with mental health. But one of the important things I think that came out of that was really the impact of our early childhood experiences on our lives later and how that never really leaves us, right? So those early relationships that we have really kind of form the template of how we relate to people way down the line. If you've ever heard of like attachment, right? So that initial relationship that we have with whoever our caregivers are really does then influence the way that we relate to people later on in life. So
wow, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
So let's maybe lay down the groundwork for where this conversation can go or what branch we're exploring. So can you speak a little bit about the different branches of mental health and what can that look like?
Yeah. So like theory wise, there's so many, I just mentioned psychoanalysis. There's CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy. And these are really kind of the more bigger ones or foundational ones. And again, this is within a Western psychology framework. So I do want to like just put out there that we have always had ways as human beings, I think, of dealing with our nervous system or relating to our psyche. But I think that, here in the States, of course, Western ways of doing that have been privileged. And what's interesting now is I think we're coming back around to understanding the importance of the body in that conversation, which is what I think you might pull a lot from communities of color. So we think about, drum, dance, and things like that, medicine people, shamans, things like that were always ways that I think more indigenous folks had of addressing mental health. But in our modern day, it's more of this Western psychology approach.
Would it be fair to say that those cultures may address it what may associate it as something else rather than
exactly right.
Okay.
Like we might talk more about spirituality, than we do about like mental health. It may be related to other aspects of our being than the way that we conceptualize it here in the West. So that's a really great point. Another branch which I'm looking to move into more, which I'm studying more, is kind of somatic and the way that the body is included in this conversation around mental health. And so dance movement therapy is something that I'm really interested in and passionate about. So that's another branch off.
So by dance movement therapy, the takeaway would be like some kind of physical movement therapy. Yeah.
And it's almost like the way that what I'm discovering is that it's just a different way of communicating. I'm traditionally trained more talk therapy, right? And I think I have a pretty good understanding of like how to glean what's going on with somebody through verbal communication. Body language is a piece of that, but it's not obviously as explicit as it is in dance movement therapy, where it's like you're really trying to connect with somebody kinesthetically to pick up what's going on with them and how to intervene. So, yeah.
Do you think it's not as explicit because as a society, we've valued like words more, and back to the whole mental thing, right?
Absolutely.
But it can be maybe not, I wouldn't say argue, but it can be proposed that like our body language might be the first language.
Say more about that.
Yeah, like it takes us how many years to learn how to talk, right? But learning how to move around and interpret like the physicality of it is something that maybe happens right away.
I love that.
I don't have research on this to back it up, but it just seems like that would be the most natural thing.
It's right. Yeah, I love that, and I don't have research either, but I'm going to agree with that. Yeah, I do believe that that's one of the first relationships we have is to our own bodies, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the first vehicles of communication, right? So I think that's absolutely true. And so as I'm learning dance movement therapy, I'm learning that I have to learn a whole new way of hearing someone almost, and that's through watching their bodies or kinesthetically connecting with them, and through that you can do like your own assessment and kind of gain ideas about where to go with treatment or how to intervene. So
would it be fair to say that it suggests that experiences, good or bad, such as trauma, is stored in the body and can be released through physical movements? Absolutely.
Yeah. There's a really great book by a psychiatrist named Bessel van der Kolk. And you can get the book, you can listen to a few of his podcasts, but he really goes into great detail about the ways that trauma stores itself in our bodies. And so, so it's really important, I think, in thinking about how we heal, that we don't leave the body out of the conversation, because, everything is experienced through the vehicle of our body. And definitely, as you said before, all of our experiences get stored in our body, and trauma specifically needs to be processed and metabolized. If you think about the way that we metabolize food, right? We eat it, we take it in, we take the nutrients from it, and then we pass what is no longer good for us, right? And so it's almost the same with like experiences, right? Like we take in and we experience an experience, and with trauma, it's like that experience almost gets stuck, right? And so we're not able to really metabolize or process through it. And so trauma therapy is one of the ways that we help do that. And working with the body has been shown to be a really helpful way to help move those experiences through us.
So like, what are some tips to better identify mental health? Like what can... Or I guess what I'm asking is, what's the spectrum of mental health, right? So for example, if we take the mental health out of it and just think purely physical, someone can get a paper cut or a broken leg or stab, right? And we can recognize that there's layers to that severity, right?
Yeah.
So what are some ways that we can recognize the same trends for mental health? Is it like an action and a thought, or is it like someone's body language? Like, what does that look like?
And you recognize them in ourselves and in other people? Yeah. That's a really good question.
So for example, I don't know the spectrum fully, but I would guess that somewhere in there's like one place where maybe self-limiting beliefs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then on the other end, something more destructive might be suicidal thoughts.
Yes.
So
that is exactly.
Yeah. So what are some things that can be that can add more resolution to that spectrum?
Yeah. I'm going to try to answer that to the best of my ability. So one of the things that's coming up as you're talking is like, for instance, if I think about a specific diagnosis like depression, right? So some of the symptoms of that are kind of ruminating, negative self-thoughts about yourself, others in the world at large, low motivation, right? Low mood, tearfulness, anhedonia. So you can't really find joy in life. You may lose interest in things that used to be really fascinating for you. Like you don't really have an interest in those. You may oversleep, you may undersleep, right? So there's all these cluster of symptoms that come together to form depression, right? And if you look on the DSM, which is the book that we use to diagnose, it'll give you a certain amount of time and a certain amount of symptoms can really determine what is the severity of that, right? So if we're just talking about well, not just, because I don't want to qualify anybody's experience because it's subjective for everyone. But if we're talking about maybe somebody who has, just some ruminating thoughts, some negative ruminating thoughts, maybe a low mood, maybe they're losing interest in things that they used to. And let's say that that's kind of the amalgamation of the symptoms that they have. Maybe that be like a more moderate depression, right? Something that's a little lower on that scale. But if somebody's shifting all the way to the point where they're having suicidal thoughts, then we'll say that's more severe, right? And so the intervention is going to be different, obviously, at each level of that.
Because I found that usually mental health is not recognized or identified until it gets really severe.
Exactly.
But exactly, how do we spot all the signs early on to prevent that red flag zone?
Yeah. That's a really good question. It's how do we become more aware sooner?
Yeah, right. I guess the analogy might be, you're at top of the hill and you see the hill in front of you. Let's stop right there versus rolling down and then looking up all the way you fell down,
Yeah. I mean, one of the first things that comes to mind when you say that is awareness, right? I'm a big proponent of a mindfulness practice. And then this is just when we're thinking about ourselves and recognizing the symptoms of ourselves. I'm a big proponent of mindfulness practice, right? So we can build that awareness of I'm not feeling like myself, right? I have a baseline, and that changes from day to day. But, if I notice in myself that, my mood is a little bit lower than it tend to be, and that's been a trend for a little bit, or if I notice that I'm isolating, a big one, for depression and for myself in general is I'm typically an introvert, but if I notice that I'm getting to the point where I'm isolating, that's a red flag for me of okay, Aaron, you need to take care of yourself, right? Because you're kind of going within yourself and you're separating yourself. And so all that's to say, I think really having an awareness of yourself of what it feels like when you feel well, right? What does it feel like when I'm functioning well, when I'm connected to the people around me, when I'm connected to my work, when I'm connected to the things that I enjoy? What does that feel like to be in that space? And then I think when you can be aware of that, you'll notice deviations from that, right? And so I guess a good way to acknowledge or recognize not so great mental health is to notice, when do you feel great? And how do you show up and how do you relate to these different domains of your life, right? When you're in a good space. And that's actually one of the things that we would look at when we're determining the severity of a diagnosis is how is this really impacting this person's overall functioning? So,
I like what you're saying. And the key theme there would be awareness, right?
Yeah.
And I think critical to awareness is having the right language or vocabulary to understand what's happening. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the importance of language in regards to mental health, whether it's actually having the ability to describe how you're feeling, right? Yeah. And depending on who you are, that may seem very, very straightforward and easy, or it may be actually a little confusing because I've noticed that sometimes people don't really feel good, but they don't feel bad either. They feel something else, Mm-hmm. But their immediate thoughts are well, I don't feel bad, so therefore I must feel good. But they maybe don't have the other words to describe what is their feeling. So let's talk about how important is language to having more awareness.
I think that's a really great point. There's something called alexithymia, which is essentially the inability to name the emotions that you're feeling. I used to work a lot with kids at a center that's focused on domestic violence and child abuse. And I work with children who had been through traumatic situations. And one of the things that we try to teach children is how to identify and like express your emotions in a healthy way. And that would be like as simple as like playing a game where we pull different emotions out of a hat, right? And like I'll act out the emotion and the kid has to name it. And then the kid has to act it out in themselves, right? Now it seems like a game, but really what you're doing there is you're teaching the kid to be able to name and identify their emotional states so that when they do start to feel a certain way, they have the language to be able to express it versus to suppress it and act it out. Right. And I would say the same applies for adults, right? You know, I think there's like, there's a myriad of tools online, literally lists of feelings, like even the emojis, right? Like you can look on your cell phone and you can see all these different expressions. Like you can use those as tools, you know, if you're trying to learn for yourself or if you're trying to show somebody else how to identify different feeling states inside of yourself.
Have you ever come across the feeling wheel?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the feeling wheel?
Is that, wait, let me just clarify the feeling wheel for me.
Okay. So, if you ever done any visual art form, there's the color wheel, right? So the feeling wheel is the same concept where instead of like reds and blues and greens, it has like, okay, let's break down good. What is good? Are you delighted? Are you joyful?
I've seen
you know,
yes,
and what's bad? Bad is like, maybe I'm just tired. Maybe I'm uninspired, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I have seen it. Actually, if anyone's interested, there's a website called Therapist Aid, and you don't need to be a therapist to go on it. But it has all these different like worksheets and tools that you can use for different things regarding mental health. So on there, it has like a whole category about emotions, and the feelings wheel is one of the tools that's on there. And I think, things like that are a really great way to begin to explore like what different feeling states are like inside of you. I think journaling is also a really another great way. I recommend that a lot to folks. And, you know, I think it's a really nice way of checking in with yourself and building that relationship with yourself so that you can begin to identify with yourself. Is
it just any act of writing down your thoughts, or is there a direction to it? Is it a certain...
I think it depends on the person. There's journals out there now that actually give you tools about different styles of journaling. You know, but if you're trying to identify your feelings, you could just start writing out like, I feel, you know, pull out your feelings list, pull out your journal. I feel this today, right? And I think over time, as you begin to, be able to identify that, it becomes easier for you to express yourself too. So
now I have to ask, have you noticed different groups having different strengths and bottlenecks? So for example, would it be fair to say that women tap into their emotions a lot easier than men? Not as like a biological thing, but maybe as a cultural thing, how they're raised up. Because I do know it's pretty common for guys to be like, oh yeah, you know, boys don't cry kind of thing.
Oh, absolutely.
Where you shut down your emotions and you don't display any of that. So what's been your experience?
Yeah, it's been my experience that men tend to struggle with identifying their feelings, and women tend to be socialized to be more in touch with their emotions. I actually ran or facilitated a group of perpetrators of intimate partner violence at one of my other jobs. And it's rough being in a room full of men who had certain thoughts about, you know, who women were, you know, and I would hear them talk about, you know, women's relationships to their emotions, and they kind of categorizes almost like crazy, or, you know, like there was something wrong because they were in tune with their feelings. I'm like, these beings give life. Like you want the being that gives life to be in tune with themselves so that they can be in tune with the child that they are trying to rear, you know? So it tends to be that men really struggle with that. And really oftentimes I think don't see the value in being able to identify what's going on inside of themselves until something goes wrong.
Yes.
Until they end up in a group.
Yeah.
You know,
So exactly. Yeah. Great point. Back to the whole thing about like being able to be informed and aware on the signs before it happens, and not just like, okay, now I can't get out no matter what, so I got to sign up, right?
Exactly. Like I've hit rock bottom. Now I have to do something different, which, you know, some people come to change that way, you know, but you don't have to.
Yeah. You know, speaking personally, so take it as you will, but I did struggle with identifying my emotions before. Back to like the whole applying a too broad of a stroke to what I was feeling, which is good or bad.
Good or bad. Exactly.
Yeah, good or bad.
Polar extremes.
I know. And I actually discovered the feeling wheel on my own, and I hung it on my wall for a few years.
I love it.
And it worked wonders. And now I'm like,
look at that, y'all.
It's this stuff really works.
It works.
Yeah. Like I do wonder if in the future things are going to change with more information being brought out, right? That having emotions doesn't make you weak, because I think that actually is a stigma. Like
it's a source of power.
Yeah. Like as I forget what song it is, but as the saying goes, the more emotion I put into it, the harder I rock, right?
Where's that song?
Yeah, I know it's one of the hip hop songs. I forgot what it is right now, because it's been a while, but I definitely know hearing that a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's your superpower. And I mean, like, we're artists, right? So like, I think we understand that, like, I mean, I don't always practice it. Like, sometimes it's difficult. A lot of times it's actually difficult to tap into that space. But when I can be vulnerable and really be in touch with my feelings, it just colors my life, and so much more of a, like, there's so much more vitality in that. Yeah. Than kind of suppressing. So.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the stigmas around mental health, such as either mental health is for crazy people, for the weak-minded, too emotional. It's almost to the point where it's like demonized or weaponized, right? Maybe it's different for you since you're in the field, so you see others who don't view that way. But I get a general sense talking to certain groups of people that it's like it's an afterthought, or it's like I don't need it, that kind of thing. So can you let's unpack that, and how can we humanize mental health more and make it more approachable?
Yeah, I think like what we're doing right now, having conversations about it, I think helps make it more approachable. And I do want to acknowledge that I feel like the conversation is changing. I mean, the fact that we're even having this conversation right now, I think is a result of like all the conversations around mental health that are really burgeoning right now. I think especially for communities of color. I think that historically there hasn't been a lot of space for people to have these conversations. And again, especially, marginalized people, because we're kind of in survival mode. If you think about, our parents, right, and their parents, like there was no space to talk about your feelings, right? Like, what do you mean feelings? Like we have to like do what we need to do to survive. And so it's really beautiful to see specifically marginalized groups opening up to the conversation around mental health and really allowing ourselves our full humanity, right? By acknowledging our feelings. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely an immigrant coming here, and mental health in the older generation is like, it's like a very alien concept, or the approach might be like, why are you complaining? Just be grateful for what you have. Yeah, which has its place and purpose. But I think maybe going back to like a little bit of Maslow's hierarchy, as you move up with your needs, and then you're no longer waking up with the thought of like, am I going to die today?
Exactly.
And then all these other things get unpacked, right? Yeah. Whether it's childhood trauma or otherwise.
Yeah, it's like when you have that kind of stable foundation, then you can go deeper into unpacking some of those other things. But again, when you're in survival mode, it's not really the time to do that.
Yeah. So what are some things that you noticed that has helped soften even the hardest personalities towards mental health?
Oh, I don't know if this is going to help, but I love using music.
Okay.
Like, I think this song is just genius. It's the Solange song, I tried to drink it away. What is that one? Cranes in the Sky.
Yeah.
Right. I thought that song for me feels like such a beautiful metaphor for feeling your feelings. And so sometimes when I would be in group with grown ass adults, we'll be talking about emotions, and we'll be talking about, like, for instance, the ways that we suppress emotions or don't really acknowledge them. And I'll bring up like that song or like other things in pop culture that kind of reference like emotional processing. And I find like if you can find something that people can relate to, it's a really nice segue into talking about mental health. It's a really nice way of normalizing it.
So what I'm hearing is find some kind of connecting or anchor point.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And then hopefully through that door, you can get past the walls, get past the barriers, and get it to lower.
Exactly. Yeah, just find that point of connection. And in therapy, I'm a huge proponent of like, you have to make that a connection before information can pass through. I think I know the connection to be one of the most foundational pieces to the work of therapists. In fact, the research shows that regardless of whatever modality you practice, it tends to be that it's the therapists themselves and the relationship between the therapist and the client that has the hugest impact on outcomes for the client. So yeah, that connection piece is huge.
Yeah, let's talk about the connection piece one more time and how that may translate to being connected to a community.
Oh yeah, okay. So one of the things that I bring up a lot is in therapy is just belonging, right? I think it's a very basic human need. And a lot of times I look at like pathology or when things go wrong, or what happens when we don't belong, the things that go wrong that happen when we don't feel like we belong. And so specifically, being somebody doubly marginalized, Black and queer, and working with my own community, I see what happens when we don't feel like we have a sense of belonging to our families, in particular, and the ways that we then go searching for our chosen family, but also the harmful impact that has of feeling like you're not worthy of belonging, And so connection, I think, is the foundational piece to good mental health, because as human beings, we're designed to be in relationship with one another. That's how we survived as a species, right? Like if you were alone, you were probably going to die, And so being in groups and feeling that sense of connection and belonging to a group is essential, I think, for mental health. Yeah.
What are some like hallmark qualities of a good community, or say if someone doesn't have a community, right?
Yeah.
How can they identify one community from the other as far as like, should I belong to this, or is this community toxic to me? Because community can also be bad if that community is like tearing you down.
That's a great point.
Or judging you, That's a so point. Back to the whole point of importance of language, because I think the right community is going to use the right language to reach you or empower you or inspire you, Yeah. So can you speak a little bit about like, what are some things that somebody could look for in a community?
Yeah.
Whether it's like a sports team or an art form or whatever else,
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I think there are different points of connection, right? So one point of connection might be like you said, like a sports team, right? Like this is something that I enjoy doing, right? And so I'm amongst other people who enjoy doing this thing.
So like interest-based.
Interest-based, right?
Okay.
Yeah. And that thing in itself might be what brings you into the group, but then when you're in the group, there may be deeper intimacy that develops over time because you're hanging out with these people who all enjoy doing the same thing, right? So that can be a point of connection to a sense of belonging. I think about how I feel. Do I feel like I can show up as my full self in a community, right? I think this is actually. Do people know about soul?
Huh?
On this podcast, do they know about soul?
No, we haven't talked about it.
Okay. Soul is great. And it's a group of friends that me and Vin belong to. And I think that was one of my real first experiences of like a deep sense of belonging. I'm going to cry. A deep sense of belonging because I felt like I could show up fully as myself at Soul. And that's how I knew that I had found a sense of belonging. Like I didn't have to hide parts of myself. So I think, if you can find yourself in a space where you feel like you can be you and you don't have to cut off parts of yourself for a sense of like attachment, then you found a nice community to belong to.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's very touching. So the theme that I hear is being confident and being visible when the armor's down.
Yes. If you can drop the armor and be safe, that's gold.
Yeah. Wow. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like where this is going. Mm-hmm. So, Aaron, you've been involved in like several different communities, whether it's soul or African dance and urban choreography, right? Mm-hmm. Can you speak a little bit about like maybe how mental health is viewed in these different communities? Whether there's like similarities or is one community more open towards these conversations than others? because you also went to Ghana to study dance, right? Like,
yeah, actually, I went to Ghana on a service learning trip in grad school. So I do study West African dance. This trip, there was one day that we spent at the University of Ghana studying dance, but for the most part, we were over there. And shout out to ASB Ghana. It's an organization that takes students from college over to Ghana and other places in Africa now as well. So can we put that in the show notes or something? We'll talk about that later. But yeah, so that trip was really a service learning trip. But as far as the conversation around mental health in different communities, I see now, even within the dance community, the conversation growing more, just because I think the conversation around mental health is just really, really burgeoning right now. But typically, I don't think people historically, I don't feel like the communities I've been a part of have like explicitly said mental health, right?
Okay.
So for instance, like for my master's program, I had to write a thesis to graduate, and I wrote my thesis on the impact of West African dance on positive mental health. And so, you will hear people, I think, when they dance talk about, and this was what the research showed, talk about like, I'm going to get my healing, right? Like I'm going to class, like to get my healing, right? So I was interested in like, well, what do you mean when you say that? Right? Like what is it about this practice that you feel to be healing? Now, I 100% know this to be true, right? Like I'm not questioning that it is healing, but I was interested in like, can we really like kind of make more explicit or tease out the parts of the form that are healing? So one, just moving your body, right? We already know tons of research on exercise and what that does for the body. But the piece about mindfulness, right? So when I'm moving and I'm focused on moving in the music, I'm in the moment, right? That in itself is positive mental health, right? For African Americans, there's this deeper sense of ethnic identity and ethnic pride that can come from participating in the community, which is correlated with positive mental health, right? And the other piece was, so there's mindfulness, a sense of community and belonging, and there was one more that is escaping me right now, but it's going to come back if I keep talking. A sense of belonging, what we've been talking about the entire time, right? So the drum and dance community is pretty small, at least in LA, right? And it's very tight knit, right? And you see the same people at class all the time, right? Like we gather outside of class, like we have different events that we all come to together, and so there again is that piece about the importance of a sense of community and helping to support your mental health, you know. So.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Mm-hmm. All that is amazing. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about like the importance of self-talk.
Okay.
Yeah. Self-talk can lead to self-hate or self-love, right? So let's talk about self-talk.
Absolutely. Yeah.
How important is it? How can we have like a better dialogue with ourselves? You know, I think the first initial thought can dictate what happens next for a person, whether like they allow possibility to come into their life, right? Or they say things like, I am never going to make it, right? Which is a pretty closed statement.
Yeah.
Never is ultimate.
Exactly.
You know, never is ultimate. It's unchanging.
Exactly.
Right. And then versus changing to something like, I can learn to be better, or I can try one more thing, you know?
Yeah.
So that, even though it acknowledges it may be like hard, but there's still possibility to change from this state, right? So let's talk about the importance of self-talk.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. One of the things that came up when you were talking is in cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the things that we look for in somebody's thought process, like absolute language, very rigid, black and white, like I will never, or this always happens. And it's like, well, there may be exceptions to that, right? Like if you really looked at your life, there may be times where you were able to do something successfully, right? You know, but when we're in that kind of negative mind state, whether it be the result of trauma or, you know, some other mental health issue, it can be really hard to see possibility, and it can be really hard to see the gray area, right? We only see the black and white. So again, this is another place where I'm a huge proponent of mindfulness, right? Because I think the first step is to become aware of our self-talk, right? Like what is the constant dialogue that's running in my head all the time? What's the quality of that, you know? And then once you kind of get an awareness of what that is, you can intervene with some of the language that you were using, right? Slight little changes in your thought process opened up the space for possibility, right? One of the things that I used personally in my life that I found really helpful was the use of a self-compassion practice to kind of change my self-talk. So there's a woman named Dr. Kristen Neff, and she did a lot of research around the practice of self-compassion. And the 3 components are 1, mindfulness, right? So acknowledging like I'm experiencing suffering right now, like this is tough, right? The second component is acknowledging your common humanity. We all experience tough situations. This is a part of being human.
So like, in line with what you said earlier is, by acknowledging your humanity or your place amongst everything else, you're removing yourself from a place of isolation.
Beautiful. Exactly. And you're bringing yourself back into connection with the human race. Like we all experience difficulties. Exactly. And I think that's a sidebar. That's a hallmark of, a lack of good mental health is that sense of isolation. Right. And then the third component of the self-compassion practice is like saying something kind to yourself or even doing a kind gesture to yourself. So placing your hands over your heart and saying, may I be at peace. Right. Or, I didn't do it well today, but I'll try again tomorrow. Or, this moment doesn't define me or whatever it may be, but just showing yourself some compassion in that moment. And it tends to be that over time that softens that really kind of rigid negative self-talk that we have about ourselves. So,
yeah, I really wonder how common negative self-talk is because, speaking personally and not anybody else, just me, right? So speaking personally, like say before it was typically very easy and maybe even natural. I guess easy and natural can go hand in hand, right? For me to like do something for somebody else.
Yeah.
But when it came to like me receiving it, instead of just receiving it, my self-talk or my mind inserted before anything else happened is like, do I deserve this? Yeah. Definitely negative self-talk right there.
Exactly, right? And who knows when those kind of like ideas about yourself came into being. Typically, it happens that, again, early childhood experiences impact the way we think about what we deserve and our self-worth. And so then we spend a lot of our lives, once we become aware of that, trying to work ourselves back from that or really shifting that narrative, that dialogue that's going on inside of our heads. And I think it's important to know that like it's possible. Neuroplasticity is a thing. We can rewire our brains to be more compassionate towards ourselves and towards other people. So
I love that.
Yeah.
So impact, huh? Let's talk about how these past 2 years has impacted or maybe even changed mental health. By these last 2 years, I mean since the pandemic, right? Definitely wasn't around for the flu in 1912, 1919. I forgot the year.
Flu?
Yeah, Spanish flu. But experiencing this first thing, it has to have brought up mental health to so many people.
Oh gosh, yeah.
What have you noticed? What can you say about that?
Yeah, it was rough. I mean, I guess we're a bit more out of the woods, but it was rough. Like again, like we're designed to be in connection with each other, and we have to isolate from each other. I think you can probably see all over the news, like the increase in rates of anxiety, depression, domestic violence, substance use, everything, over the course of the pandemic. Is that better? So yeah, I think it definitely brought the conversation around mental health even more to the forefront. I was working throughout that, right? And, I was living in a studio apartment, right? And I was working for an organization that shall remain nameless. And when the pandemic hit, we all had to work from home. And so my studio apartment literally had a bed and my little beanbag. Like it was good for me, right? But it wasn't necessarily the space that I was planning to be doing therapy in, for months on end until I moved. And so I had to catty corner this beanbag against the wall with my, with my certifications to make it look like I had an office space. And so I'm holding space for people, right? Or trying to hold space for people the best I can while in the midst of or the context of a global pandemic, right? So I'm cut off from a lot of my own resources, like dance classes that I would be going to or other community.
So the connection and community part was cut off.
The connection and community part was cut off, right? And not only that, but part of my community was how I practice dance, which is a huge part of what keeps me sane.
So not only the community, but the community was also tied to your practice.
Exactly, which is what was really difficult. It did. They started having classes outdoors and things like that, which I think was really, really great. And I mean, the added benefit of like the sun while you're dancing to this is great. But yeah, it was hard initially, and we did the best we could. With like.
Did you find that either an increase in volume or new types of clients showed up because maybe they never had to experience or they never had to ponder about mental health before, but now it's like social isolation for such a long time. Now they're, I guess, turned on to it.
Yeah. I mean, where I was working at the time, and I think this was also because everything was virtual, that we were just getting more people who were seeking services, but also the people who were already in services started showing up more to their appointments. Also because they didn't have to leave, they couldn't leave the comfort of their own homes. And so I think also with the advent of, the use of technology to facilitate therapy, there's been a lot more people, using the services too. So I think the pandemic hugely shifted the conversation around mental health. And it's going to be interesting to see too, how it continues to unfold and the impact that this has had on us, as the pandemic kind of comes to a close, what the long-term effects of the pandemic has been on our mental health. So,
yeah, would you say that the pandemic brought in more people who needed mental health, but did it also increase the amount of people who are lifelong practitioners now, because now they see the importance of it, right? And now they're going to make it a part of like their daily.
I could see that being both. I could definitely see that being.
Well, one of the things I really admire was seeing certain communities really come together and adapt, and make the most of the situation.
Exactly.
Whether it's like teachers trying to teach online, but they were still trying to like find a way to reach out and offer their services with everything that's going on. And I think that was really wonderful to see.
Yeah, demonstrating our resilience as humans. Yeah, well, we made it out of other things, and I mean, like we, despite this being a horrible situation, like where we were technologically, I think made it a lot easier for us to navigate if we didn't have a lot of the resources that we have now. So so we definitely demonstrated resilience. Yeah.
What are some tools that somebody could use to support themselves? And do these tools differ if you're approaching someone else on the topic of mental health?
Yeah, I think that's really important to remember, like, especially for me as a therapist, is like, it's not one size fits all. And so, so that's kind of I can answer kind of generally about like some tools that I use for myself and that I've suggested for clients, but really it's like everybody's different. Everybody has a different nervous system. Everybody has a different set of experiences and things that are going to connect with them versus someone else. So for myself, I'm a huge proponent of like movement, right? Like, I can't recommend exercise, but if you have a physical practice, keep doing it or turn up the volume on it, right? I say that a lot of times, like you might already have things in your life that you're doing that support your mental health, and maybe you just don't realize that. And so I may just get more explicit about like, hey, how you meet with your friends every so often to just talk and catch up. Make sure you do that like every, at whatever interval, works for you, because that's belonging, right? That's making sure that you're not isolating, right? I'm a huge proponent of mindfulness. I'm a huge proponent of also basic self-care, right? So sleep is a huge one. And maybe you've experienced this, like if you can't get good sleep, that really does impact your mental health in a lot of ways.
As I got older, sleep has suddenly become such a good friend.
Yeah, it is.
I guess back to the awareness thing. I wasn't as in tune and aware of how much good sleep did to me before.
A good night's rest like can take care of a lot. And when we experience trauma, a lot of times people who are experiencing like PTSD or trauma, they have a hard time getting good sleep, which only exacerbates, their symptoms. So things that you can do to help you rest is really important too. So,
So what I'm hearing from you gives me a lot of definition for one of the branches, right? And that's, if I understand you right, it's mental health can be a thought, right? And being aware of your thoughts and being aware of how your thoughts informs your decisions.
Yes. Yeah.
And also it can be an action like movement therapy or an exercise. And it's not necessarily this thing that's reserved for hotlines or this thing that's reserved for when someone's on the couch, like listen to you, you know?
Yeah. It's always happening, right?
Yeah.
It's always just like your physical health is not just when you go to the doctor, right? Like it's always present with us. And it's probably driving a lot more of our lives than we realize, right? Like you said, like, you know, the space that you're in with your mental health is probably going to influence how you show up in the world in your relationships. It's going to influence the types of decisions that you make. So yeah, it's something that's always with us.
That's, you know, truer words probably have never been said because, you know, let's say something happens to you and you're still maybe putting it on the back burner or you don't process it. And then you show up and talk to someone else and they start yelling at them, right? And then there goes how that language influences that person.
Exactly. What is it? Trauma that is not transformed is transmitted, right? Anything that we don't work through, we kind of can't help but really carry into other areas of our life. I think we can compartmentalize to a certain extent as humans, but eventually like the levees break. You know?
What do you envision the future of mental health be, either 100 or 1,000 years? So let me like elaborate on where this is going, right?
Yeah.
So there's a show that I really have gotten to enjoy. It's Star Trek Discovery. I can't recommend the show enough. It has so many things. I think it's modern, and I don't want to say woke because I think there's people who have taken that mindset too far and turned into a destructive thing. But let's just say it's very informed. It's very informed on how we have advanced as a society, right? So some of the things that Star Trek Discovery shows is like in the future, there's no more race wars. There's no more race wars. In fact, actually, as humans, we're not even concerned if something else is an alien species, right? So on that show, they show different species and different humans of color being in roles of power, whether it's like a black captain or an alien captain, you know, and then they're just going about the day as if compassion and being kind is all that matters. And so
evolution.
Yeah, right. It's great. It's great. And how the show differs from other shows is it doesn't revolve around so much of like an impeding alien invasion as much as like our quest just to discover new things. And they have some hints of they communicate some hints that like, okay, here's how we address this issue, right? So for one of which is like, if they're out in deep space and they find a new planet, right? And if that planet has never been contacted, they will not interfere with that planet's development. Meaning they're not going to colonize that planet. They're just going to leave it alone and let it be, right? Yeah, and so there's even like LGBT characters. I mean, maybe it is my own understanding on the outside, so it could be different if you're in that community, right? But it seems to represent that those roles very well. For example, there's two characters on the show, right? Actually, one of them is named Paul Stamets, by the way.
His name what?
Paul Stamets.
Paul
Stamets.
Stamets.
You know who Paul Stamets is?
No, who's that?
Paul Stamets is the world's leading mycologist.
Leading
mycologist?
Mycologist?
Yeah, have you seen the documentary Fantastic Fungi?
No.
Okay. Well, anyways, they paid an ode to Paul Stamets, right?
Okay.
But Paul Stamets and the other doctor, they're in relation together, right? And they're both queer.
Oh,
you know? Yeah. And so it's like they are in relationship and they're part of the crew, and it's never any point of like the show.
It just exists.
Yeah, it just exists, and love is love, right?
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
And there's actually even a character that is taking on a symbiotic partnership with another being, right? And by taking on that symbiotic relationship, you're inheriting all the ancestors who and memories of that symbiote's memory.
Oh wow.
Yeah. And so they refer to themselves as they, them.
Oh,
because it's actually multiple people in one person, right?
Ooh, wow.
Yeah. And the character who plays that is half Vietnamese and I think half Caucasian trans actors.
Oh wow!
Yeah, yeah.
It's a lot of great representation.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm on the outside, so I don't know if that's really accurate.
Yeah.
But I like how these roles are represented in the future.
Yeah.
And it's just like, okay, we finally overcome all this stuff, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that sounds beautiful. And hopefully that's where we're headed. I think, that's a huge question thinking about the next 100 to 1,000 years. I think that, and I think I've heard in like people that I really respect, especially in conversations around mindfulness and different practice that help us like evolve our brain, that I feel like there's so much great information out there on ways that we are responsible for our own evolution in a lot of ways, right? Like we can practice our way towards being more kind and compassionate, human beings. And so like, I think the more that people have access to like these types of technologies and these types of practices, hopefully the more that we can evolve towards this like beautiful, representation of the future. But I feel like a lot of that is really in our hands at this point, so I can't say because it's looking scary right now when I look at the news, but I get encouraged, by folks who are, really doing the work and being examples of how, we can take responsibility for our own evolution. So hopefully we get to Star Trek.
You really got to get that show. I can't recommend it enough. And also, there's things that are implied on that show that shows that, okay, we've overcome that. For example, no one ever talks about health insurance. Mm-hmm. Like whoever's hurt just gets healed.
Just gets healed.
Just gets healed. And that doctor is also very informed on mental health itself.
Yeah.
So there was a scene where, okay, spoiler alert, if anyone hasn't seen the show, there's a scene where the whole crew travels 900 years into the future, right?
Okay.
Yeah. And then the whole crew is freaking out by trying to keep it together and try to play it cool.
Yeah.
Because everyone, by going into the future that far, all your family have died.
Oh, God.
Yeah. And the crew was trying so hard to like pretend like they weren't affected,
Yeah.
And finally, the doctor brought everyone to say, "Hey guys, let's acknowledge that we're affected by this."
There you go.
Let's really acknowledge that we're hurt.
Mindfulness, right? Let's acknowledge we are suffering because everybody we know is gone 900 years down the road. Yeah.
Yeah. So I really like that show of how much it focuses on like these ideas and not so like, oh yeah, there's an alien invasion, we got to go kill somebody.
It's really more about us. It seems like.
Yeah.
I love that. And not some foreign enemy, but more about us.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah.
So let's talk about how things may have evolved. Meaning, are there any mental health practices that have got phased out because they weren't effective, or the new research shows that's something better? Like what's been your findings with that?
That's a good question. I think one of the things that we're really recognizing now is a little bit of what I said earlier, is not everything is going to work for every person, right? And so there are a lot of different modalities and ways to practice now, and there are a lot of different what they call as evidence-based practice. So basically systems of practicing therapy that people have developed and done research around, that to show that they are helpful for certain groups of people. But oftentimes a lot of the research for these modalities are done with like college students, right? So it's a very particular group of people. A lot of time people of color are left out of those studies. And so we can't say because something works for one group of people that it's going to work for everyone. And so I think that's been a big part of the conversation lately in mental health is like, you really want to be client led, and like ask yourself like, and collaborate with the client, like versus kind of that more top down hierarchical, I'm the psychoanalyst, you're the client, like I'm all knowing, and I'm going to heal you somehow. I think there's much more of an understanding that this is a collaborative process and the relationship is really key to that. And the intervention needs to be something that resonates with the client, right? I'm not going to do therapy on you. I'm going to do therapy with you. So I think that's a big shift that's happened in mental health. So,
Well, I love that.
Yeah.
So one thing I'm hearing from all that is the the need for the client to take initiative and take action and participate in this whole process versus either expecting or submitting to someone else just taking control of their experience.
Exactly. And, as a consumer of mental health, like if you don't feel like there is a good connection with the therapist, give it some time, like in a relationship to see if it's a good fit. But if it's not a good fit, then maybe you need to explore other options. And I think sometimes people think, just like with maybe you feel like you get stuck with a medical doctor, like this is my doctor, But with therapy, I personally feel there's a much different level of intimacy in the therapeutic relationship. And so if you don't feel like you can trust somebody or like they can hold what you need them to hold, like then seek somebody who you feel like is a better fit for you, So.
Yeah. Speaking of seeking other things out, let's talk about sense and sensitivity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when I think of this concept, I think of being sensitive is where something affects you, right? Yeah. Whereas sensitivity is being aware of what's happening to a high degree and allowing it to inform you, but not necessarily being affected by it. Yeah.
Say that for me one more time. I don't understand that.
So like being sensitive is letting something affect you.
Okay.
Yeah. Like say for example, I notice this thing is happening and now it's affecting me. It's bringing me down and it's heavily influencing me. Right. Yeah. Whereas having sensitivity without being having sensitivity without being sensitive is being able to be aware of these things, but still preserve what's happening here and not be affected by it.
Yeah. So being sensitive, it sounds like it's almost like you have no control over how something impacts you and it can like drag you down. Whereas sensitivity is being aware of the impact of something, but I guess being able to kind of maintain your own kind of like homeostasis in the process. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And what's the question around that? Is like
So like, what's been your findings with that? Like, how do you gain sensitivity without being sensitive to what's happening? Because I think sometimes, maybe this is just true for all providers. Is like you guys have sensitivity, right? And so you're being informed of your patients, but how do you not be affected by that?
Yeah. Great question. Great question. I find for myself, like when I'm doing my own work, and I'm really one of the kind of mantras I say to myself or prayers I say before I see clients sometimes is, may I have the space to hold the space, right? So may I have enough spaciousness inside of my nervous system, right? May I be regulated enough to be able to, take in this other person and be with them in their experience, but also not, like you said, be taken down into the state that they're in, right? So it's dance, right? It's art because like I want to like empathize, right? Like I want to be able to access the parts inside of myself that maybe feel sad or, can really connect with that emotion. Otherwise, the client might not feel like I'm there with them, right? They might feel like we're cut off and like I'm supposed to be human as a therapist. Like you don't want me to not be in my humanity because then I'm no good to you, So one of the ways that I think I'm able to like increase my capacity to hold space, so feel the emotion but not be kind of like taken down by it, is by my practices, So I try to make sure that I do my meditation practice. I try to make sure that I exercise regularly, that I do my own work of walking through the things that I'm afraid of in my life and things like that. And I think those things help me to be more spacious inside of myself so that I can be with somebody else in their experience and hold space for it without us both coming down to that space. That's not helpful for either one of us, to stay in. So
great insight. Yeah. Do you have any thing you can share as far as how to increase one's sensitivity? Because I think sometimes without a sensitivity approach, things can be dismissed or shut down. Yeah, I've noticed that in others and also in myself, where like I definitely ran into a lot of situations where like, damn, I wish I had more sensitivity to that, but learning it after the fact, So like, what are some things that you went through to increase your sensitivity to either your patients or different groups, whether it's like a POC group or a non-POC group,
That's a good question. I mean, so like, I think working through your own experiences, like I have a therapist and I've had this therapist. So in grad school, we're actually required to have a therapist, which I highly recommend if you're going to be a therapist, to know what it's like to be on the other side of the couch. And so we had to do 30 hours of psychotherapy. I've been with her since we started years and years ago. Amazing woman. And so doing your own work, and I think digesting and processing your own experiences is a huge way to increase your sensitivity. Because I think part of the thing that I think has us push other people's suffering or pain away is when we're not acknowledging our own suffering or pain.
And would you say that by acknowledging or processing your own experiences, you gain connection and relevance to someone else's experience?
Exactly. Right. And it doesn't have to be the same experience, but take your life's curriculum, do your work, right? And I think the more that you do your work, the more you have the ability to hold space for people doing their work. So
being able to learn and work through the process helps inform and increase sensitivity.
Yeah, and slowing down, I think, is another big one. I'll say it. I've said it before. I'll say it again. That's why I think mindfulness is so huge. Like slowing down and really getting connected to what feelings feel like inside of your body.
That's a good topic. We definitely got to unpack that because I think I live in the Bay Area, so it's very, very expensive. And I noticed that people here don't slow down. Probably not that much different from New York, right? So let's talk about like the impacts of societal pressures to be productive versus allowing us to rest.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'm guilty of it too. Like I have to make sure that I really take the time to like slow down and tune into myself. Is one of the reasons that I'm really loving the study of dance movement therapy. Because I'm finding in practice with my supervisor, she helps facilitate me through something called authentic movement. And a big part of that process is literally slowing down to listen to and respond to sensations in my own body, right? And the amount of like quiet I have to like get to really be able to feel that and respond to that. I leave the practice like feeling like the whole world has gone shh. And when it's shh, then I can be more perceptive. I can be more in tune with what's going on inside of me and around me. So any practice that you can do to kind of pull yourself from the constant machine of like doing, which again, very guilty of, especially when I was younger. I think is, the more you can slow down, it's really going to be helpful to you to tune in more. One of the things that I was talking to a friend about the other day, which you probably agree with, is like, I don't think there's a lot of space to be bored now. Like you can always occupy your mind with something. So, right, you could be listening to this podcast, but like on my downtime, like, am I scrolling? And this is not to demonize social media, because I think it definitely serves a purpose. But if every one of your free minutes is spent having your mind be active, you can't hear your own voice, right? You can't hear yourself enough to be in tune with yourself enough to be in tune with others, I think, in a really substantial way, to really be present, So I think slowing down is just super important. Yeah.
It sounds like on the other side of the coin of slowing down is minimizing distractions.
Yes.
And allowing your thoughts to unfold as they may be, whatever it is.
Daydream, like be bored, like so much creativity comes from that space of like having some space, And so I would say the theme of like, for me, as at different times in my life, the theme has been like slow down and create space for something to emerge. But if there's no space, like God can't get through. Like you got to have space for that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What are some things? What are some other things you do in movement dance therapy?
Yeah.
What are some exercises? Yeah.
Yeah.
And is movement dance therapy an accessible program, or is unique to what you're doing in LA, or can it only certain people in certain regions? Like where can people?
That's a really good question. So let's see. I'll answer that question first, and then go back to the one about other exercises. So a lot of the programs are on the East Coast. And so they have programs that you can go to that are 2-year programs, and you'll come out not only licensed as a dance movement therapist, or I think credentialed as a dance movement therapist, but you can also have the educational requirements necessary to get licensed as a mental health professional, right? So for instance, like I'm an MFT, right? Licensed marriage and family therapist. That's a separate license than the dance movement therapy. That's a separate credential that I have to do. But there are programs that you can go to where you can go through and you can have the education for both. And then you get out and you just get licensed. since I was already licensed as a therapist, I took what they call the alternate route. I'm taking the alternate route through the American Dance Therapy Association. So I'm finding teachers who are certified to teach the classes within the kind of coursework for dance movement therapy, and taking those independently. And then over the summer, I'm going to start doing more of my practicum hours. And then that'll bring me towards being a registered dance movement therapist. So a lot of the programs are on the East Coast, but on the West Coast, there is an alternate route that you can take if you're interested in that.
So that's on the practitioner side.
Yeah.
What about on the patient side?
Yeah, on the patient side, you can actually go to the American Dance Therapy Association website, I believe, and you can look up practitioners in your area. So if you're interested in being a client, they have a directory.
So what I'm hearing is movement dance therapy is pretty accessible. It's not just isolated to like the East Coast.
No, it's not just isolated to the East Coast. There's definitely practitioners out here on the West Coast. It's definitely not as common as, a more traditional psychotherapy, but there are definitely practitioners here on the West Coast too. So
yeah, great info. Let's talk about how pop culture or social media may influence like this whole field of mental health. So, definitely Facebook, Instagram, pretty much all the big tech companies are constantly fighting for our attention, showing things that either excites us or makes us angry, or maybe the illusion that things are perfect. What are your thoughts on this?
That's a whole nother episode, and I have so many thoughts that they're all jumbled together. Oh gosh. I was talking to a friend of mine recently, and I think she watched a whole documentary on influencers, and how there's actually like kind of like a higher rate of suicide amongst people who choose that profession. And I think part of it has to do with kind of constantly having to portray a certain image of yourself, right? And it's like when you're constantly in a state of trying to portray, or an image of yourself, or doing like impression management all the time, like, I wonder how that impacts our ability to authentically understand who we are, right? Because if our personality is being shaped by likes and by what people want to see, right? Like we may push other parts of ourselves away, right? Or not really tune into ourselves because we're like hyper focused on how other people are perceiving us.
It seems, correct me if I'm wrong or misinformed, but it seems like the opposite of what we talked about earlier in regards of finding the right group where you can let your armor down and you can be seen and celebrated in that.
Exactly.
Versus going down a path where you have your armor on all the time. All the time. You're trying to portray yourself in a certain way. Now, it's not to say that people can't and don't use social media in a conscious way and are authentic about how they show up in that space. But, I think that there is a large percentage of folks who allow the way people view them and again, likes to shape their identity, right? Yeah. I've seen older groups of parents successfully use Facebook for doing things like reconnecting with their high school or childhood friends that they will never, ever discovered. Yeah. So I think there is some room there. And obviously, we have a good footing on the Facebook itself. It's how we get connected, right? So not to say that it's all evil. It's definitely agnostic, but maybe the real danger is like in younger people with social media access. Yeah.
And I appreciate that you're adding that to the conversation because, I think everything has its like light side and its shadow side, right? And so I think it can definitely be this wonderful tool of connection, which is again, back to that basic need that we have as humans, right? Which I think was, I think often, if you hear people who have started social media say the reason that we did this is because we want people to be more connected. And I think that is definitely one of the benefits of it. But I think one of the drawbacks of it is I think sometimes as humans, we don't like people to see the ugly side of ourselves, or the side of ourselves that, we feel like is less acceptable, or we have shame around. And so if we're constructing whole identities that leave out parts of ourselves, I think we can kind of get lost.
Yeah. I think one of the things that social media highlights is the need for quantity over quality. Because I think focusing on relationships, focusing on your own inner work, it's like, or the quality relationships, you know, it's definitely not a numbers game.
Yes,
it's like an experience game, right? But social media has introduced like, okay, well, I got 50 likes on this photo, so therefore I should do more of it. Or this person got 100 or 3,000, so therefore they're better than me.
Exactly, right? Like you're gauging your worth based off of that. Not to mention, like every one of those likes is a hit of dopamine, right?
Yeah, and there's something to be said about gauging your worth on people's opinions that you have no idea who they are.
That part.
You have no idea who they are.
That part. Exactly. But you know, I mean, especially for young people, like we're so insecure. Like I remember being a teenager, like, you know, if 1,000 people said they liked me, I'd go on social media too, you know? So I think it's really, you know, I think a piece of it is I've heard that they're trying to come out with like some sort of legislation around like social media hygiene, right? Like, cause we're adapting to this thing that our biology is not necessarily ready for, right? So how do we do this in a responsible way?
You know what? So would it be fair to say that qualitative goes hand in hand with mindfulness?
Say that again?
Would it be fair to say that qualitative goes hand in hand with mindfulness?
Qualitative goes hand in hand with mindfulness. Can you explain that more to me?
Yeah. Like for example, instead of just saying, oh yeah, I have 1,000 friends, you know, that's quantitative, right? And say, oh yeah, I had this great conversation with this one friend.
Boom.
Very qualitative.
Boom.
And then there's mindfulness to it.
Absolutely. I don't know why when you said that, I thought about like the gratitude list that I try to do daily. It's like, you know, there's a million things that I could focus on, right? I could focus on, you know, the likes that I didn't get on some posts, right? Or I could say, I'm really grateful for this amazing conversation that I had yesterday with Vin, because it really just opened me up to some new ideas and I felt really connected to him and I feel like our friendship is really strong. Like being in that space, right? And I'm just talking about one friend, right? One conversation that we had and my nervous system is like, you know, like connection, right? Versus like 1,000 likes, which is nice, you know, but it's that quality is not necessarily there.
Yes. Great point, man. Like so maybe if we can, I think what I want to say is maybe social media distracts us to the wrong tribe. Meaning like now we think our tribe is all people who like our posts, right? Or all these people on the internet that maybe share whatever is happening. But our true tribe is these intimate relationships that we have. And that's where our energy should go.
Yeah, I think it's just important to remember because again, like you said, we don't want to like demonize social media. And I know that some beautiful relationships have probably even have definitely started because of that. But to remind ourselves like, nothing replaces actual human connection. Nothing replaces what we're doing right now. Like that's just our biology knows a difference, you know?
Yeah. You know what? I think that's where the scary part is for younger people. Yeah. Younger, I mean like less than 20. Yeah. Young than 20, right? Because I think in some ways, let's say you watch TV or you're driving a car. Yeah. There's a clear delineation of when you're doing these activities. Yeah. Versus when you stop, right? So as soon as you walk away from your living room, you stop watching TV. Yeah. You get out of the car, you stop driving your car, right? Yeah. But smartphones are there with you all the time. And I think in some ways, smartphones has like not replaced like as in like it should be replaced, but replaced by via so many people having it, right? Yeah. Replace human interaction.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think you'll hear lots of very smart people argue the exact same thing, you know, is that we're taking these like substitutes for human interaction rather than what we really need is, you know, direct contact with one another. So absolutely agree.
So like now a little more personal question. How have you been these past 2 years, man?
Oh, Lord.
You know?
I've been all over the place. I think I mentioned to you earlier, the pandemic was difficult. You know, it was difficult and it was beautiful at the same time because like difficult because again, was disconnected from a lot of my communities, you know, trying to practice therapy in the context and not even just the pandemic, but, you know, the racial, you know, social justice movements, you know, going on after the death of George Floyd and like being in downtown Long Beach when the building was on fire down the street from me, you know.
You know what, I wish wasn't the case is I wish a lot of these movements remain true to the movements, right? Because I think too many people jump on the bandwagon and use it for like political things.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
that's with anything though.
Yeah. And I have to say that that can't help anyone's cause or mental health.
Yeah. That's, I mean, I think with anything you have like the essence of what it is, and then you have everything else that comes on top of it. So I don't know that we'll ever be able to change that,
Star Trek Discovery.
There you go. That's what we're aiming for.
You're doing it right.
Exactly. Right. But yeah, so we had that. We had the freaking attack on the Capitol, like all these, like we weren't navigating just the pandemic. We were navigating so many other things coming to a head, I think, in our country. And so like there's this meme I saw on Instagram. I don't know if I can say that. We're not sponsored by them, right?
You can say it.
Okay, so whatever. Okay, it's the internet. So there was a meme that I would look at from time to time. And it was this, I think it was a character from SpongeBob SquarePants, right? And it's this little dog. And he's sitting at a table, like with a little cup of tea in front of him, and he's looking super calm. And then the world is burning down around him. And it's like being a therapist in 2020. And like, that's exactly what it feels like. It's like you're trying to maintain like, it's all good, everything's okay, and hold space for somebody when like in the context that we're in. So that was a challenge. That was a hard time. But at the same time, like I found love. Like I met my partner, like we've been together for almost 2 years now. We live together with our 2 cats in Long Beach.
Amazing. It goes back to that theme of possibility, right?
Exactly. And I didn't see that coming. Like he came into my life literally right before the pandemic. And then we didn't have anyone else to be around. I definitely didn't have anyone else to be around. And so I started quarantining with him and his 2 roommates at the time. We just went to their wedding, at the end of last year. So this beautiful relationship has come out of it too. So it's kind of all over the place. And I'll say that it definitely was one of those things that like, if you ever have those situations in your life where it's like, what are you really made of? Like, I know you think you're this kind of person, or you think that you have like this sort of fortitude and resilience, but like, how are you demonstrating that through this situation? So it was definitely rough, but I think I'm coming out of it, just more aware of the benefits of being consistent with what I know works for me, if that makes sense. Like I'm a huge fan, and I'll use this word over and over again, of practice, right? Like I think everything is practice. And so it was one of those times in my life where it's like, oh, you think you meditate, huh? You need it right now. You know what I mean? Like you really need to stick to the things that helps that sustain you, so. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Yeah. How can people best support mental health practitioners?
Oh, that's funny because I don't really think about people supporting us, but supporting
because the pandemic taught me the importance of supporting medical professionals. Like all this was on the front line with COVID.
Oh,
someone has to help you guys out.
Yeah, that's a good question. That is a good question. I'm just going to say what's coming to my mind. Mm-hmm. If you are somehow connected to a mental health practitioner, if you're like the partner of one or the friend of one, like don't let them pretend like they're okay all the time, and recognize that we are not perfect, right? Like we are human beings just like you are. We have struggles just like you do. And I think that's part of our power, like that we are human, right? And we acknowledge that. So don't let a mental health practitioner in your life let you think that they're okay because their job is to hold space for other people. Check in with them as well as you would check in with anyone else.
So like checking in and reminding that we're all part of that circle, right?
We're all a part of this. We're all bozos on the same bus, right? So like we need help too. And so, So I think that's what I would say about that.
All right, you got it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your background and work our way back. Like how did you get to where you are today?
Gosh, that's big.
In whatever level of details you would like to share.
So I guess I'll start with my childhood. So I was raised a military brat. My mom was in the Navy. My parents were always separated. So when we were very young, we went to go live with my mom. And so we moved around a lot. Like I lived in Virginia, a few places in California. I lived in the Bay. I've lived in San Diego, lived in Texas, lived in Puerto Rico for a while. And so I bounced around a lot as a kid. And I think that because of that, I had a little bit of difficulty developing intimacy with people because we wouldn't be around folks for too long. You were probably one of the friends that I've had for the longest, right? I think one of the benefits of that is that it lent itself to me being easily adaptable, right? And I can pretty easily like relate to other folks because I'm always interested in like, what are you about? Like, let me get to know you. And I think as a kid, that was like a safety thing for me because like, I don't know anybody in this new space that I'm in, but a really easy way to get to know people is to be nice and be likable and to figure out what it is that they like, right? And so that kind of became my modus operandi for a very long time.
So like building community through cooperation.
Yeah, cooperation, but cooperation, I think, and sometimes maybe not showing up as my full self because I don't know how, I don't think I really had any idea of what that is because I wasn't very stable in one place for too long. So my identity, I felt like, was always changing,
I feel like that's a very deep, true statement because who really knows themselves at that age,
Who really does? Who really does it all, right? But I think especially for kids, when there's not a lot of consistency, it can be difficult to really like establish kind of a sense of like, this is what I like, right? And this is my thing, right? I was always kind of more interested in what other people were interested in because I want to make friends. So I think that lent itself to me being a therapist in the way that like, whoever sits down in front of me, like I'm a figure out a way to connect with you, to the best of my ability. Now it doesn't work 100% of the time, but I think I'm pretty easily relatable.
So if I hear you right, it's like you develop a need and ability to figure out how to connect with the people around you and the situations around you.
Yeah.
And that naturally translated to being a therapist where it's all about connection.
Exactly. Beautifully stated. That was a nice reflection, man. Exactly. And I think one of the things that I'm continually working on is like, well, what's my center? Like, what do I like? What do I believe? And that's a continued journey, I think, for everyone. But I think that's just kind of my unique journey towards like really understanding that more for myself. So, so that's kind of like how I became to be a therapist.
How does dance play around that?
And to mental health?
Yeah, because you also do dance therapy and also you're a dancer yourself.
Yeah. So just I'm studying dance movement therapy, so I just don't want to misrepresent myself, but I'm in the process of becoming a dance movement therapist. But yeah, so dance has always been something that was a part of my life, whether it was just like casually doing it, but when I got to undergrad in San Diego, Culture Shock Dance Center opened up like down the street from where I went to school my sophomore year. And so I went and I took a couple of dance classes and I just fell in love. And I think it was one of those things that I probably would have always wanted to pursue studying dance. Like I was in talent shows and things like that. And I was always a kid at the party, like cutting a rug. But not until I was like grounded in San Diego and there was an opportunity to train did I really start studying. So I got on scholarship at that studio, auditioned for the company, and eventually started dancing for them. While I was dancing hip hop on that company, a good friend of mine, Sarah Shepich, from Unity Dance Ensemble, so I think you remember Sarah, was giving me like ballet lessons. And so I really, honestly, at one point, I was studying more kind of classical European technique because I wanted to see how it helped improve like my lines and things like that for hip hop. And then I fell in love with those dance forms too. And then we started studying house after I met you, and then we met Brian Green and my mind was blown. And he said, if you want to understand house more, study African dance. And then I got into African dance. And that just like opened me up in ways that I hadn't been open before. So dance has always been something that has just been a companion of mine, and also I think a litmus test for how I'm doing in my life. Like I can tell by how I'm moving, you know? And so after undergrad, I took about 4 years off from school to just work and dance, right? I'd throw myself into the practice. And then I decided I want to go back to school. I moved up to Long Beach with my partner at the time, and I applied to Cal State Long Beach and got in. And when we're in school, we're studying technique to be a therapist. And I like distinctly remember thinking, this is just like dance. Like you learn the different methods or interventions or techniques, but like when you're with a client, you have to just like let go and be in the moment. Much like dance, like you can learn steps, but you ultimately have to respond to the music. And so when I saw that connection, I was like, dance has really given me a leg up in understanding how therapy works. And I think I suspected that somewhere in the world existed something along the lines of dance movement therapy, you know? But I didn't realize that there was a whole organization devoted to it called the American Dance Therapy Association. And so, you know, in grad school, there weren't any explicit opportunities in my program to blend movement and psychotherapy. And so I did my thesis, you know, around that to allow me to explore that. And so for my research, I just got to go to a bunch of dance classes, right? And then like ask people why they dance, you know? And so I'm really grateful that I had the opportunity to do that project, because I think it really, now I have this thing that I've created, you know, with the thesis that I think is carrying me even further into what it would look like to really blend these two passions of mine. So dance came in because I think that I could have never just sat across from people for the rest of my life and not include movement as a part of that process. Like,
was there any particular styles that nudge you towards the direction of dance movement therapy?
West African.
Okay.
West African and house, actually.
Okay. So let's unpack why that is.
Yeah. I would say West African because I think I noticed specifically like the way that we practice and the class that I've taken, we do ballet style, which is where we do a movement or a series of movements down the dance floor toward the drummers, right? And then at the end of class, we can typically have this circle where people will go in and they'll, based on the rhythm, you know, solo, freestyle, dance, you know, improv in a way that feels authentic to them, to that rhythm, right? Well, obviously in house dance, there's similar with the cypher, right? And b-boying and things like that. So I'm like, there's some connection there, right? Like to go out into the middle of this space and be supported and being your most authentic self. Like there has to be something like healing about that, right? And so I think that's one of the things that like kind of turned me on to like, okay, maybe there's something here. Yeah.
So to kind of like bring it full circle, we talked about the need for community, connection, the need to be seen in your authentic self, and these styles that you're talking about has all these elements inherently, right? I definitely experienced going to the circle many times, and you know, if anyone ever wanted to feel like what it's like to be seen your real self, step into a dance circle. That is your real self. Yep. Whether you like it or not, whether you want to hide or not, you can't. It's I hate to make absolute statements, but here I go making one. You know?
That is an absolute statement.
Like when you go to a dance circle, whoever you are, whatever form, wherever you are, will show up.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of the things is like, it keeps you so honest, right? Like, cause whoever you are is going to come up in that moment, you know?
So it's like, you notice that feeling or that observation, and you notice how it connects to, I guess, a healing or therapy aspect, right? Connection, being seen, and also community, because these dances happen with each other,
with other people, right, who are supporting you in your expression of your authentic self. Yeah.
Let's talk about more about the with each other part, because I think some people who are not part of the dance scene think dance is all about battles. You know?
That's very true.
So let's break down what that connection, what that community means in this sense, because maybe dispel the myth that dance is only about battles, you know?
Yeah. I mean, So I'm not entirely sure where we get the impression that dance is all about battles, other than like my assumption of that is like that's what we see on TV, or
so
competitive, exactly. Or and so, but I mean, like when you think about it, dance was a way of people gathering and coming together and celebrating, and and I think for most of history, it's probably been that. I mean, I think the battling, I'm sure, serves a purpose, right? Like it's what I think about Vogue, right? Like it was a way to fight without your words, right? Or even b-boying, probably the same, right? So a way to handle disagreements or even express anger, right? In a way that's constructive, right? Through creativity. But the idea that the only time to dance is when I'm battling somebody, right? Like I think that's probably got capitalism written all over it.
Yeah. When I taught dance, that was definitely a common misconception going in. Not saying it's wrong. It's just if that's what's been exposed, then that's exposed, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it's one way, that we get exposed to dance, but like.
So you're talking about like the deeper sides of dance, where it's like connection, community building, and being seen in your authentic self, which is. You don't hear anyone say that in like the broad appeal sense,
Like it's all like, here's an absolute statement, which I'm actually taking from Brene Brown, so I'm not going to take credit for it. But like she says, all life is about connection, or she has said that in one of her TED Talks. And when I heard that, I was like, yes, right? So like, what was the function of us dancing? It probably wasn't to battle, like as dancing came to being, it was probably about bringing people together, and so like, it still can serve that purpose these days. And I don't think there's nothing wrong with battling, because there's probably ways that you can approach battling.
Yeah, there's definitely healthy aspects about battling where violence was averted. Yeah. And maybe disputes were resolved.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. But I think it's important to just remember that there's like, dance serves so many different functions, outside of just like proving that you're better than someone else. So, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. What are some organizations or resources that people can reach out to for different mental health resources or services?
Yeah. So if you have insurance, one of the ways that you can find mental health services is actually just by talking to your doctor. And, hopefully they can connect you to, if your insurance allows for it, they can connect you to a therapist that's contracted through your insurance. There's tons of platforms now for virtual therapy. If you've heard of like BetterHelp or Talkspace, things like that. Again, I'm not advertising for them, but those are some options for you. I know that there's something called Open Path Psychotherapy, which is a platform for low fee therapy. I think it's like $30 to $60 a session. And you can log on, join this platform, and then find a therapist who meets kind of whatever criteria you're looking for. Psychology Today is another great website that you can use to find a therapist. We offer at the site that I work at, Reach LA, free services for queer, trans, BIPOC people. And so, you can just contact me at aaron@reachla.org if you're interested in those services. Gosh, so many avenues now. Yeah, you could probably just Google mental health services now, and tons of stuff will pop up, because there's a lot of funding going into mental health right now.
Oh, really? I'm glad to hear that.
A lot of funding going into mental health right now. Yeah. And so,
was that because of the pandemic, or?
I think a big part of it was the pandemic. I think it was happening before, but I think the pandemic really like jump started a lot of it, because it was much more part of the conversation, as we were seeing people's mental health decline because of what was going on. So there's so many avenues to services, from like nonprofits to the Department of Mental Health, can get you connected to providers, through their services. So yeah, lots of different avenues. Mm-hmm.
Great. Mm-hmm. That's good to hear. So my next question, I think a lot of people have come across this at one point or another, but how do you handle a situation when somebody is what I would say as declining in their mental health, and maybe they should see a professional.
Yeah,
but you're not sure how to navigate that conversation.
Yeah.
You're right. Because the pushback is like, oh, you think I need help? You think I'm crazy? And so forth, you know? Like, what are your tips for navigating that conversation?
Yeah.
Because, I think there are lots of situations or families or even partnerships where that may be true and they don't know how to like take it to the next step, right?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is the sensitivity with which you handle that conversation, you know? And so what I want to say is like, how are you expressing your concern, right? You know, and how are you couching that in like compassion? You know, are you like, you need to go get this taken care of, or you need to go, talk to somebody? Or is it, I'm a little concerned. I'm noticing some shifts, right? Like I'm noticing like, you used to love to, do this thing and now you're not doing it as much anymore. Is there something going on? Like, can I help in any way? Do you need or want access to any resources? You want to do that together, So I think really back to your word earlier, the sensitivity with which you handle that conversation, I think, can definitely influence how that conversation goes. Yeah. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Is there anything other specific about that?
No, it's just I noticed like nothing specific, but just in general, that topic can be difficult to bring up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also maybe this is just coming to me like asking yourself if you are the one to be bringing up that conversation, right? Like, is the relationship between you and this person such that you feel based on your knowledge of the relationship that like I am the person to bring this up to this person, or are there other people that you want to enlist for that conversation, right? Because maybe they have a more easeful relationship and they can hear it more coming from this other person, right?
So the two things I'm hearing are, one, acknowledging that you may not be the person to do all these things, right? And listening help to help others.
Yeah.
And two, if it is you or anybody else, is make sure it's entered with sensitivity.
Exactly. And with sensitivity and compassion, right? Like, cause like we all think we all know what it is to struggle, And so like, how would you want somebody to bring that information up to you? I would say err on the side of, being gentle, because maybe you're somebody who like, you could take somebody being like, you need to get yours together, but I want to say probably do as little violence in that conversation as you can, because it can be really sensitive. And I can feel like a really vulnerable space to have somebody reflect something back to you like that. Like, oh my God, you saw that? You saw me like not being my best self. Like that can bring up, shame and things like that. So just being aware of, how you approach that conversation, the sensitivity with which you approach it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Point well taken. So any closing thoughts for our listeners out there? What can you offer as a takeaway? Anything at all, whether it's someone first tapping into their emotions, their mental health, or someone or other practitioners out there. Yeah.
I guess I would say maybe to do an assessment for yourself of like, if you can look at your physical health and like think about like, how am I doing with that? Like, how am I taking care of myself in that way? Do that same kind of assessment for your mental health, right? So like, how am I feeling, right? Do I know what I'm feeling, right? Do I need to pull out a feelings wheel or find some way to help me get more in touch with my emotions? So really doing those, slowing down enough to do those check-ins with ourselves to really see like if, maybe we need some extra support, So I guess that would be for people who are interested in and really just assessing their mental health more. If you feel like you need professional help, please reach out. Like there's so many resources these days. So, I can say, don't be afraid. You might still be afraid, but even act if you are afraid, because you may, like you said, prevent something from snowballing into something much worse, So I would say that maybe for consumers of mental health, for practitioners, like this is a reminder to myself, like to make sure that I take care of myself so I have the space to hold the space, right? So making sure that we, talk to our therapists, right? And I think also that we don't expect ourselves to be perfect, right? Because we are not caricatures of humans. We are not our job, we are people first, and to remind myself of that. So that I don't think like I don't need support because this is what I do for a living is provide other people support. So yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure. There's so much good information here. And I hope to see you again in a future episode.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Yeah.
Oh, great.